The honeymoon period is over. It's been about half a year since people started getting their Steam Decks, including high-tech lowlife. So what's changed? What's it really like using the Steam Deck day to day? When the Steam Deck initially released, there was only some 250-ish games marked as verified or playable. Now that number has increased to around 5,000 games marked as verified or playable. A massive increase from 250 to 5,000 in the span of only 6 months. That's like 10% of the entire Steam catalog, and Steam has like some 50,000 games available, ranging from VR games to other types of games to programs as well. Valve really is putting in the work testing more and more games and retesting games that initially did not work. That, you know, either they've confirmed that they work or maybe they've been fixed in some capacity. And secondly, Proton itself gets updates quite frequently. Things that may have been broken in previous versions of Proton may be fixed now. Proton is ever evolving, which means that more and more games should become more and more compatible as Proton itself improves. Great. So yes, more of your Steam library should show up as playable or verified, but ultimately, that's only like 10% of the whole Steam catalog. You're probably going to have more than a couple of games that haven't been tested yet or are marked as unsupported. So at the end of the day, you're still going to have to do your own research to see if games work. You'll have to either test it out yourself or you'll go on ProtonDB to see if people got it working. Of course, even with all of these improvements, sometimes games won't work as intended. Mostly for technical reasons, though there are some workarounds that people have found or can find. But those typically aren't the main reason the big popular games aren't compatible with the Steam Deck. What could I possibly mean by this? Well, some anti-cheat games on Steam still don't work. Probably the biggest example of which is Destiny 2. Bungie more or less took an anti-Linux, anti-Steam Deck standpoint. They're gonna take a lot of convincing to bring their game over to Steam Deck. Of course, it's not all doom and gloom for games with anti-cheat. There are plenty of games that have anti-cheat that didn't work before and now they do. Devs are really noticing the Steam Deck and they're making efforts to make their games work on Steam Deck as well. And these are some pretty high-profile games, like Apex Legends works on Steam Deck, Phantasy Star Online 2, Multiverses as well, and a personal favorite, DJ Max Respect V, work on Steam Deck now. So on the compatibility front, things are a lot better than they were months ago. So how about the hardware? Does it still hold up? I think the hardware still holds up pretty well. Yes, I did replace the fan and the sticks and the SSD, but honestly, all of them were pretty good as it is. My sticks had very little issue whatsoever. Honestly, I probably could have just stayed with those, but I really wanted to upgrade to the Hall Effect sticks. As for the SSD, well, I initially bought the 256GB model, and so honestly, that by itself isn't enough. Not for my tastes. I like to have a bunch of games installed onto my devices. But if you're the kind of person that's more reasonable, aka you don't have like 40 games installed at once, then you may be fine with just that and an SD card. But I went full balls to the wall and I got a 2TB NVMe SSD, and it was not cheap. And the fan itself, well, initially I thought I had no issue with the fan. I thought it really wasn't that noticeable. But when I opened it up and swapped out my Delta fan for the Huaying fan, boy oh boy did it make a world of difference. That said, I haven't seen many instances of new Steam Decks coming out with Delta fans these days. So maybe the fan thing could be a non-issue these days, I'm not entirely certain. Of course, everything surrounding the Steam Deck has changed, but what about the Steam Deck itself? What about the operating system itself? And what about Steam itself? What's changed here? I'm not going to say everything's changed, but I am going to say quite a bit has changed since the Steam Deck first came out. Your updates range from small bug fixes and hot fixes to major upgrades. Major new features that change the way you interact with your Steam Deck. For example, per game performance settings, it used to be that controlling your TDP and GPU clock speeds and all that used to be universal for the entire Steam Deck. but now you can set those settings per game. Another major update that's changed since the Steam Deck's original launch was the magical 40Hz update. It may be hard to comprehend this without, having a Steam Deck yourself, but essentially you can downclock the display's refresh rate all the way down to 40Hz, and you can frame limit yourself to 40 FPS as well. And while the experience isn't 60 FPS on a 60Hz display, it's certainly way better than 30 FPS on a 60Hz display. Kind of like seeing high refresh rate monitors, this has to be seen with your own eyes to be understood. Watching stuff like this on a 60Hz panel yourself, like this video, really doesn't do this feature any justice whatsoever. The point I'm trying to make is, if you're watching any early reviews of the Steam Deck, you should probably watch those with a grain of salt because things have changed quite substantially since the Steam Deck has come out. I mean, why do you think every YouTuber, including myself, is making a half-year review? It's because it's different from what it was originally. So we've talked a lot about the hardwares and Valve's official updates and all of that cool stuff. But the question is, what about the community? How has the community evolved? Well, there's a couple of projects that have emerged from the need to have a better Steam Deck experience on all fronts. The first of which is the plugin manager. So I've talked about the plugin manager in the context of theming your Steam Deck, ricing your Steam Deck, swapping the menu sounds, all of that cool stuff. But what if I told you that there were more functional aspects of this? While there aren't too many plugin types, there are some very useful plugins in here, like CSS Loader, Audio Loader, a music control plugin. Heck, there's even a plugin that lets you put Proton DB ratings onto Steam game entries. It's only been about half a year and already we have a framework for custom plugins. The hope is that more community members will join in and make plugins as well. Another big aspect that the community has improved upon is installing non-Steam games onto your Steam Deck. Installing non-Steam games can be a challenge for some people, but thanks to the efforts of programs like the Heroic Games Launcher, Lutris, Bottles, honestly, there's a myriad amount of programs out there designed to help you get non-Steam games working on your Steam Deck. Or I guess Linux in general, but Steam Deck. It's thanks to all of the programmers and community members that have made these programs as easy as they are to use now. And while ultimately things are still work in progress, progress is being made, and it's being made at an alarmingly fast rate. And what about emulation? Well, I made a video about EmuDeck. EmuDeck, in my opinion, is the easiest way to get emulation set up. Before EmuDeck, setting up emulation manually was a pain in the butt on Linux. Now with EmuDeck, setting up emulators and downloading ROMs and installing them and adding the games to your Steam interface is very, very easy. In fact, it's so easy that I don't even bother recommend people doing it manually anymore. Unless, you know how to do it yourself, but you wouldn't need my advice for doing that anyways, now would you? You know what the best part about EmuDeck is? I don't have to go through the painstaking process of helping individual people getting emulation working. Thanks, EmuDeck team. Now we get to talk about Steam inputs. What is Steam Input really? Steam Input is a supremely powerful input mapping engine built into Steam itself. Steam Input has always been a nice to have on desktop Steam, but here it takes center stage. For the Steam Deck, it allows you to play games that don't have controller support currently, like Gloomwood. Gloomwood is slated to have controller support at some point, though currently it doesn't, so we're gonna make our own control scheme here. So that's it, huh? It just lets you remap buttons to different buttons, right? Well, there's a lot more to Steam Input than you may realize. My favorite use of Steam Input is making use of these touch menus. There is an option to present this menu as a radial menu instead of a touch menu if you prefer. But the ability to more or less create a functioning control scheme for games that don't have controller support, like Gloomwood as of the time of this writing, it's a godsend. One of my favorite Steam Input games is of course Starbound. Starbound is a game with many controls. Many different buttons do many different things on this game. And given the fact that you're playing this on a controller, there's a lot of different controller considerations to take into account when trying to play this game. For example, in Starbound, you can use your mouse to not only aim and shoot, but also build stuff as well. But on controller, there's a very clear need for different control schemes for both building and aiming and firing. In similar games like Terraria, the developers have already figured out a way to do this. But here on Starbound, we have to figure out our own way to do this. And with Steam Input, we have the tools to do so. I may make a video about my own Starbound configuration at some point, because It's pretty complex if I do say so myself. It's very easy to dip your toes in Steam input, but to master it is quite the task. So here's an interesting question. What's happened to my relationship with gaming since I've gotten the Steam Deck? Well, it's changed quite substantially, actually. I've bolstered my Steam library quite a bit since the Steam Deck's original announcement. I've played and beaten quite a few games that I probably would have forgotten about if not for the fact that the Steam Deck came out, like Ender Lilies, which I think is a great game with an even better soundtrack. And that's a game that was just sitting in my Steam library for about a year being untouched until I got the Steam Deck, and now I feel kind of stupid. Interestingly enough, this has also affected how I interact with my most played game, Destiny 2. I'm gonna level with you, I play a lot less Destiny 2 than I used to because I'm doing most of my gaming on the Steam Deck. My own Nintendo Switch has basically gone untouched. The sort of games that I would play on my Nintendo Switch, I could just play on my Steam Deck instead. And they'd be a lot cheaper too. So what's really changed in my life since I got a Steam Deck? Well, you could say a lot of things have changed. I've touched more of my Steam library in the past 6 months than I have basically the entire lifespan of my Steam accounts. It's amazing just how many hidden gems I actually had, and how many critically acclaimed games I had in my account under my nose this entire time. So what's changed about the Steam Deck experience? The answer itself is quite nuanced. Playing the games themselves, it's not very different than it was before. Though more and more games are starting to work on Steam Deck, so that's a good sign, as always. Most of the improvement comes from underlying changes that have been made. The improvements are twofold. First and foremost, all of the underlying tech, like Proton and whatnot, all of that gets improvements quite frequently. The OS itself gets updates quite frequently, and at times will create brand new features for you to use on your Steam Deck. And for problems such as getting emulation set up or installing non-Steam games on your Steam Deck, there are plenty of community-made efforts towards making this a much better experience on the Steam Deck. So yes, the Steam Deck has gotten better. Using it itself isn't that different, but everything surrounding the Steam Deck has improved substantially. The main superpower of the Steam Deck isn't necessarily the fact that it's a PC or the fact that you can play a good portion of your Steam library on your Steam Deck on the go, or the fact that you can emulate quite a few systems all the way up to the PlayStation 3. It's the community. The community coming together to create solutions to problems that the Steam Deck may have. Proton GE is one such example. EmuDeck is another example, and Hero Games is one other example. And it's thanks to the openness of the Steam Deck that such community features are allowed to exist. You wouldn't be able to see this on any typical console without having to modify said console first. So even if the Steam Deck dies, the community will keep it alive forever. We finally relaunched our Patreon page, so be sure to check us out if you want to support us. Promise we'll start doing exclusive content soon. If you like high-tech low-life, you should subscribe and check out my other videos. And for more high-tech low-life updates, be sure to join our Discord server in the description below.